And welcome to Technology Tap. I'm Professor J. Rod. In this episode, we're going to discuss the 5 1/4 and the 3.5 inch floppy. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Technology Tap. I'm your host, Professor J. Rod, and this is part 1 of our feature-length journey into the age of the floppy disk. Today, we're going to slow down, rewind the clock, and really dig into what it was like when floppy disk wasn't just a nostalgic symbol, but the heartbeat of computing. Let's begin with the 5 1/4 inch floppy drive, the medium that took computers from hobbyist kits and universal labs into classrooms, offices, and living rooms. The cassette tape problem. Picture this. It's 1977. You're sitting in front of an Apple II or maybe a TR-80, your storage medium, a cassette tape recorder, hooked up with clunky cables. You type load program and press play. You wait and wait. Minutes tick by. The machine screens as data streams in. Maybe after 5 minutes, maybe after 20, you have your game loaded. Unless the tape slipped or the volume was too low or someone bumped the recorder, then back to square one. Anecdotes. Kids in school labs often had to rewind the tape 3 or 4 times just to load Oregon Trail. Teachers learned to start loading lessons during lunch just to be ready by class time. This was an environment that screamed for something better. Enter Shugart Associates. Alan Shugart, who had worked in IBM's original 8 1/2 inch floppy disk, knew cassettes wasn't cutting it. In 1976, his company introduced the SA400 drive and the new 5 1/4 inch diskette. The size wasn't random. Engineers literally folded a sheet of paper over an 8-inch disk and thought, that's about right. Big enough to store useful data, small enough to sit neatly on a desk. The first version stored 110 kilobytes per size. To us today, that's a text message. Back then, it was freedom. The Apple II and Wozniak's genius. Steve Wozniak saw the potential immediately. Apple's first computer used cassettes, but Woz designed a cheap, elegant disk controller that slashed the cost of floppy drives. Apple's Disk 2, released in 1978, made the Apple II far more usable. Real-world impact. Schools bought them by the hundreds. Suddenly, students can play math drills or write essays in minutes instead of hours. Games like Mystery House became immersive because floppies could store graphics and sounds that cassettes never could. Story. One teacher recalled lining up 30 kids in the front of an Apple II computers, each propped in a Disk 2 and loaded Oregon Trail. By the time the bell rang, they died of this but hey, the software actually loaded, like the Oregon Trail, right? IBM PC and the business standard. Then came 1981, the IBM PC. IBM chose the 5 1/4 inch disk as the main storage. That decision didn't just affect IBM, it set the standard for the entire clone industry. Suddenly, every PC-compatible machine shipped with a 5 1/4 inch drive. In offices, employees lived in a rhythm. Insert the system disk, PC, DOS, swap to the application disk, either Lotus 123 or WordPerfect, swap again for the data disk with your spreadsheets. If you had a single drive, you might swap disks dozens of times in an hour. Dual drives were a blessing, one for system, one for data. Real world story. Accountants describe the end of the month reporting as floppy ballet every few minutes, swapping disks in and out in a perfect rhythm. Technical growth. The 5.25-inch floppy didn't stay static. It evolved. Single side, single density, 110 kilobytes. Double-sided, 360 kilobytes. High density, 1.2 megabytes by the mid-'80s. For comparison, the Enoch, the first electronic computer, could store 20 words in memory. A single high-density floppy in 1985 held the equivalent of millions of Enoch words. Fun hack. Some users cut an extra notch into the disk, unlocking the flip side. Boom, double the storage. Risky, but for cash-strapped students, it worked. Life with the 5.25-inch disc. Let's slow down and really live in this world. At home, a teenager sits cross-legged by beige PC clone, swapping Ultima 2 disc. Each change means a pause, the world of the drive, and then more exploration. In schools, kids share floppy boxes, swapping programs they copy from magazines. Hey, I've got basic games from compute. Want a copy? In the offices, secretaries filed away rolls of labeled floppies. Payroll, 1982, Q4. Client list, confidential. Letters to vendors. It was physical, tangible. You could hold your whole business in a shoebox of floppies. The push for better. But the 5.25-inch disc was far from perfect. Bend it and it was ruined. Leave it in the sun and it warped. Dust or fingerprints, instant read error. And let's not forget capacity. Software was exploding in size, and 1.2 meg wouldn't cut forever. Real-world frustration, gamers installing King Quest 3 from 6 floppies sometimes found disk 5 corrupted. Game over. That was it. The industry needed something tougher, smaller, and more reliable. Enter Sony 3.5-inch floppy. In part 1 of our special, we followed the rise of the 5.25-inch floppy disk, the soft, bendy workhorse that brought personal computing to homes, schools, and office. But as the 1980s rolled on, those disks began to show their weakness. Fragile, awkward, and too small for the growing appetite of software. Now it's time to tell the story of the 3.5-inch floppy disk, the sturdier, more portable, and ultimately iconic square that defined the 80s and 90s. This was the floppy that many of us grew up on. Let's dive in. Sony's big idea. In 1981, Sony engineers unveiled a radical new design, the 3.5-inch micro floppy. Encased in a rigid plastic shell, unlike the bendy 5.25 sleeve, protected by sliding metal shutters that automatically opened inside the drive, included a Write Protect tab, a simple but brilliant way to lock important disks. Small enough to fit in a shirt pocket without bending. So I remember these 3.5-inch floppies. I actually worked with them, and they had the little Write Protect tab that you can use it. And if you wanted to use, let's say, like a Lotus 123 disc, it was Write Protected. But if you put a little bit piece of tape over it, guess what? You can use it. So those were the little hacks that we learned in the 80s and the 90s. Though I used it in the 90s. The first version stored 360 kilobytes, then 720, and later 1.44 megs. The version that will become the global standard. Sony engineers reportedly tested durability by tossing discs across rooms, stepping on them, and even spilling coffee. They survived. The resilience was the selling point, and I remember dropping coffee on a couple of them. We just got to dry it out. Sony wasn't the only one. Other companies tried their own micro floppy designs. Hitachi's 3-inch disc, adopted briefly by Amstrad in Europe, Dyson's 3.25-inch floppy. Even IBM toyed with alternatives before picking a winner. It was the classic format wars. For a while, you walk into the computer shop and see competing discs, each incompatible with the other. And that was a big problem in the 80s and the 90s, compatibility. And there was really, really, really no standards. When standards came across PC, that was when I think it exploded. But there was no format back then, no standard. By the mid-80s, Sony's 3.5-inch design won. Why? ruggedness, capacity, and early adopters. Apple leads the way. Apple took the lead first. In 1984, the original Macintosh 120K shipped with a 3.5-inch drive. Steve Jobs wanted a disk that felt modern and durable, something that matched the Mac's sleek design. For Mac users, it was love at first click. No more bent disk, no more dust ruining a project, just a neat, compact little square you can slip in your pocket. Real-world story. College campus in the mid-'80s saw students walking around with Mac floppies, sticking out of their backpacks like badges of tech savviness. IBM makes a standard. The turning point came in 1987. IBM launched the PS2 line of computers and chose the 3.5-inch disk as the new default. That move standardized the format across the entire PC industry. Suddenly, the same disk worked on IBM's PCs, Macs, Amigas, Ataris, and more. I don't know. IT managers in the office rejoiced. No more juggling incompatible formats. Secretaries can finally exchange disks between departments without converting it. That must have been a pain. I didn't live through that. Everyday life with a 3.5-inch floppy. This is where the floppy culture hit its stride. Schools. Students saved essays and projects on labeled floppies. Some decorated discs with stickers, treating them like personal accessories. Teachers handed out assignments that literally say, turn it in on disk. Workplace. Filing cabinets and desk drawers overflow with neatly labeled floppies. Payroll, invoices, quarterly reports, and law firms' entire cases lived on box of disc. Gamers. PC classics, Monkey Island, Doom, SimCity, all shipped on multiple floppies. Installing meant feeding disk after disk. Please insert disk 5 to continue. Everybody remembers that, right? Real-world memory. Many of us spent late nights swapping disk mid-install, praying we haven't lost disk 7 of 12. It was a rite of passage. Imagine installing a game and you can't find one of the disks. You needed them all in order to install the game, or the game would not run. It would not run without it. What we used to do in the office is we would get a program. We would make copies of the programs, right? Whatever was Lotus 123 or WordPerfect, and then use the copies as standard and always save the original ones. The original ones we barely used. We made copies of the original ones. That way, anything ever happened, we at least still had the original ones. But, we made a bunch of copies of program disk because we didn't want to use them to install on people's PCs, because if they got ruined, that was it. And we were able to take some of this stuff home, right? If you had a PC at home, we just made copies for you. If you wanted Lotus 123 at home, we could make a copy of it, and you could take it and use it at home. But back then, you didn't have to. You only paid once, and that was it. That was a big problem in the industry. All right, shareware in the disk economy. The 3.5-inch floppy also fueled the shareware boom. Magazines included cover disc full of demos, utilities, and free programs. Companies like Apogee and ID Software used floppies to distribute early versions of games. Wolfenstein, Commander Keen, and Doom. Computer clubs and classrooms became hubs of disk swapping. Privacy and innovation thriving side by side. Reflection. This was the original viral distribution system, not downloads like we do now. Now we download and use, all those other programs that we use in the early 2000s, right? Napster, Shareware, BearShare, all that. We did it with floppies. We did it with floppies back in the day. Capacity and hacks. Standard and double density disk were 720 kilobytes. High density were 1.44 megabytes. And the rare extended, I saw it a very few times, 2.88 megabytes. Never really caught on. Saw it very, very, very few times. Hacks were common, formatting a 720 kilobyte disk as 1.44 meg. There was a hack, there was a command that you can do. I forgot what the command was. Maybe format A/4, I think it was. Someone remind me, if you remember what the command was, email me at professorjrod@gmail.com. But I think it could have been format A:/4, and it did it. Anyway, covering the white protect tab with tape to unlock a disk. This is what I said earlier, right? If you have like Lotus 1, 2, 3 and you're not using it, or maybe you lost disk 4, disk 5, and you still have disk 1, 2, and 3, you can use it. You put a piece of tape over it, and you can unlock the disk. Bootleg copies of games traded in schoolyards like basketball cards. Yeah. And in offices too. We used to do that all the time. So reliability and real-world failures. The 3.5-inch disc was far tougher than its predecessor, but not indestructible. Bad sectors ruined countless essays the night before they were due. Disc not formatted errors became infamous, and you just wanted to scream. Users tried blowing dust off or lightly tapping the drive in desperation. Real-world story. In 1993, the New York Times lost part of a story draft when a floppy corrupted. Journalists scrambled to retype from hard copies, the printed copies. They had to retype everything. That's terrible. By the mid-1990s, the floppies were showing its limits. Games like Myst and Windows 95 shipped on CDs. Hard drives grew big enough that users didn't rely on floppies for daily storage. Zip drive and early USB sticks offered more capacity. The symbolic moment came in 1998 when IBM's original iMac shipped without a floppy drive. Critics scoffed, but Apple was right. Within 5 years, floppies were gone from the new PCs. You know how many floppies it took you to upgrade to Windows 95? It took you 13 floppy disks to upgrade to Windows 95. That was just to upgrade. 21 disks for the full installation of Windows 95. And again, like I said, if one was bad, it's over. It's over, Johnny. It's over. It was over for you. Real world notes. Even in the 2000s, BIOS updates still shipped on floppies. NASA used them for shuttle diagnostics as late as 2011. Even our cultural legacy. Even after the decline, floppies live on. The save icon, a 3.5-inch disc, remains in Word, Excel, Photoshop, and countless apps. Many young people recognize the icon, but never seen the physical object. So what they mean is, if you go to Word, the save button, the save icon, what does it look like? It looks like a floppy. It looks like the 3.5-inch floppy, because that's how we used to save before, right? By using the 3.5-inch floppy. So it still lives, in our memory. It's still there, right? Most of you kids out there have probably never seen a 3.5-inch floppy. But, it's funny, they say what, if you give it to your kids or you yourself, the young people that are listening, would you know how to use it? Would you know how to navigate a floppy disk, right? Probably not, right? A lot of the commands were DOS commands that you needed to do on it. And I find a lot of people nowadays don't really know how to use DOS commands. But, if you see a floppy there, try to use it, see what's in it, but, we don't really have, they still sell floppy drives. I know Amazon has them. Of course, you could always get it on eBay if worse comes to worse. But yeah, the days of the floppy are over. I think the government still uses it for the one thing about the floppies, and that's why the government still uses some of it, is you can't hack a floppy, right? You can't. How are you going to hack a floppy disk? Unless it's inserted into the computer, it's hack proof. So that's a good thing. I think the government still uses it. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. All right. Retro computing enthusiasts still swap games on Amigas and Atari using floppies. Collectors prize unopened box of brand disc, Sony, Verbatim, 3M, Aztec artifacts. The floppy was more than a storage. It was a cultural connector. Sneakernet, physically walking files between office or classrooms, was the forerunner of file sharing. The floppy carried not just data, but memories, right? So just remember, the floppy is gone, both floppies, the 3.5 and the 5 1/4, and even the 8-inch that we talked about earlier, right? We talked about the first episode that we did on this, included the 8-inch floppy. They're all gone, but they remained in some of our collective memory, right? Some more than others. If you watch older movies, if you want to see them in action, watch older movies, any movies from the 80s, War Games has the floppies, any other movies during the 80s, you see floppies, all the 8-inch, the 5 1/4, the 3.5. There are good. It takes me back to the day when I watch those movies and I see that, it just brings you back to a simpler time, when things were a little bit easier. Well, not easier, but they were different, right? I think life is more difficult now, but things are a lot easier now. So, technology, I've seen the rise of technology go really, 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 really fast. It slowed down it was a period there for the last 10 years. There was nothing really innovative come out. Now, the AIs have come out. That's going to be the next big thing. So we've seen a lot. Us older folks, if you're listening, we've seen a lot of things in the last couple of 10, 20, 30 years, since we were little kids, from the internet to, having PCs everywhere, from our phones, right? Being an extension of our life, that we can't even do anything without our phones because of multi-factor authentication that we needed all the time, communicating, right? Texts, cell phones. It's made our life easier. But I feel at the same time, it's also made our life more complicated. All right, and that brings us to the end of part 2 of our Age of Floppy Disk special. The 3.5-inch floppy wasn't just a better storage medium. It became the cultural symbol of saving our homework, our games, our reports, and our creativity. It lived in our backpacks, desk drawers, and filing cabinets, empowered an era. Between the 5 1/4 inch and the 3.5-inch disc, the floppy defined 2 decades of computing. And although it has been long since replaced, it lives on every time you click on that little save icon. Next time on Technology Tap, we'll look at what came next, the zip drive, the so-called super floppy that promised to carry us into the new millennium. I'm Professor J-Rod, and this has been Technology Tap. Thanks for spending time with me on this journey through the floppy history. Share this with someone who remembers swapping discs, and as always, keep tapping into technology. This has been a presentation of Little Cha-Cha Productions, art by Sarah, music by Joe Kim. We're now part of the Pod Match Network. You can follow me at TikTok at Professor J-Rod, that's J-R-O-D, or you can email me at ProfessorJrod, J-R-O-D, at gmail.com.